Before kingdoms, before borders, before even words were carved into stone, there was conflict. The first war wasn't fought with gleaming steel or grand strategy. It wasn't a clash of empires or a struggle for thrones. No, the first war was fought with something far more primal, far more terrifying. It was fought with fear. Imagine. A time when the world was immense, wild, and untamed. A time when our ancestors, small bands of humans, were scattered across vast, unforgiving landscapes. They were hunters, gatherers, living day to day, their lives dictated by the rhythm of the seasons and the movement of the herds. They chased the same prey, drank from the same rivers, and gazed at the same stars. They were connected by a shared struggle for survival, a fragile existence in a world that was both provider and predator. For millennia, this was the way of things. Small groups might cross paths, perhaps with curiosity, perhaps with caution, but the world was big enough for everyone. The concept of mine versus yours was limited to the tool in your hand or the food in your belly for that day. But everything that changes has a beginning, and so did this. It likely happened during a time of scarcity, a long drought, a harsh winter, or a shift in the migration patterns of the animals they depended on. Resources grew thin, the river shrank, the herds moved on, and hunger, a constant companion, began to sharpen its teeth. One tribe, perhaps stronger, perhaps more desperate, looked at their neighbors not with kinship, but with a cold, calculating need. And then, they took more than their share. It wasn't a declaration. There was no herald, no banner. It probably started small, a stolen piece of flint, a contested watering hole, a poaching on another's hunting ground. The response at first would have been just as rudimentary: shouts, posturing, maybe a thrown stone, more to warn than to harm. A shove. It was the language of animals, a dispute over territory. But humans are different. We remember, we learn, we innovate, that first. Thrown stone was followed by a heavier one. The shove was met with a sharpened stick. The threat escalated. Fear, which had once been reserved for the cave lion or the punishing storm, was now directed at our own kind. And in that crucible of fear and desperation, a terrible new tool was forged: organized violence. Imagine that first moment. The first time a human hand intentionally took another human life, not for food, not in a ritual, but to secure a resource. The shock, the silence that followed the final cry, the spilling of blood not for survival against a beast, but for dominance over a brother. In that moment, something broke. A line was crossed that could never be uncrossed. No history books record this event. There are no monuments, no epic poems, no names to celebrate or curse. There are no heroes, no villains, only bones buried deep in the ancient dirt, their silent testimony lost to time. We can only piece it together from scattered archaeological clues: a skull with a fatal depression, a skeleton with a spear point lodged between its ribs. These are the quiet, grim footnotes to humanity's oldest story. But from that day forward, humanity was changed forever. We had learned how to destroy one another. And it was a lesson we would never, ever forget. That first small, desperate act of violence planted a seed. It was a seed that would grow and twist through the ages. The fear of being a victim drove tribes to become better at being aggressors. Survival was no longer just about outsmarting the mammoth or finding shelter from the cold. It was now about outsmarting, outmaneuvering, and overpowering your fellow humans. The simple stick became a spear. The sharp rock became an axe head. The group of hunters became a war party. We learned to fortify our camps, to set ambushes, to coordinate our attacks. War became a catalyst for innovation. What began as a skirmish between two hungry families evolved. Villages grew and absorbed others, either through alliance or conquest. Tribes formed, bound by blood, language, and a shared need for defense and expansion. And as these tribes grew into larger societies, their conflicts grew in scale and complexity. The fight for a river became a fight for a valley. The fight for a valley became a fight for a kingdom. War became the language of progress, the engine of empire. Think about it. Every battle that has ever been fought, every empire that has risen and fallen, every nation forged in the fires of revolution, every cause that has marched under a banner. Every single one can trace its lineage back to that first, terrible spark. It's the same fundamental equation, just with more sophisticated variables. The stick has become a drone. The hunting ground has become a geopolitical sphere of influence. But the core driver, the fear of scarcity, the desire for security, the will to dominate, it remains unchanged. That first war never truly ended. It just changed its clothes. It learned new languages. It found new reasons, new justifications, from divine right to political ideology. It hides in our diplomacy, in our economies, in the very borders we draw on our maps. It is the ghost that haunts our history, a continuous, unbroken chain of conflict stretching from the Stone Age to the Information Age. We look back and see a history defined by battles and dynasties. We see Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon, but these are just later chapters in a book whose first page was written in blood and dirt long before any names were worth remembering. That first conflict was the moment fear became violence. It was the moment humanity, in all its terrible and brilliant complexity, was truly born. This is the story of the first war ever fought. This is Axis of Time. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the deep past. If you find these explorations of history as fascinating as we do, please consider liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and hitting the notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We'll see you next time.